Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Simery. Today's conversation is one that will stay with you long after you listen, at least I hope. I'm joined by Lezlee Liljenberg, an author, artist, and speaker whose new book, If You Only Knew Navigating DNA Surprises and the NPE World, Not Parent Expected, is sparking conversations about identity, family, and the human spirit. Leslie is part of the growing population of people discovering DNA surprises, unexpected truths revealed through modern testing that can turn someone's understanding of themselves upside down. And her book blends narrative nonfiction, self help, humor, and heart to guide others through these often difficult revelations. So, Leslie, just to say, I'm very honored to have you on the show. So, a warm welcome there.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on. This is fun.
So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what led you to your DNA discovery?
Well, I've always been a writer. I graduated from University of Texas at Arlington in journalism, but early on decided that that wasn't the career path for me. So I took another direction, but I've always been a writer. It's in my blood. And I've used those skills over the years in my business career, but things kind of started moving a little bit differently for me throughout these last few years. And what sparked my curiosity really about writing the actual book was just my results from my DNA testing, and it started providing questions for me. And I just took that writing career and our world and started putting things in on paper and creating the book that I hope is helping people navigate through the DNA discoveries and surprises.
So, for those who are unfamiliar, can you explain what NPE, not parent expected, means and how it shows up in people's lives?
Absolutely. Originally, it was not a non-paternal event, so it basically really related back to men. We kind of thought, well, the men were always going to be the surprise in the situation, but that's changed over time. So an NPE is a not parent expected, basically meaning that a person has shown up in that person's lives, and they're usually through their DNA testing, that it can include people that are sperm donor children, artificial insemination children, children that were created due to an act of violence, and just someone like me that I never knew the truth, but there were things being thrown out to me, and I learned that my father was not my father. It also includes adoptees in that group. Many times people don't understand that, but adoptees can also be considered not parent expected. There are times where the adopted parents have been given a name of a biological parent, and then they eventually share that with the child. But through DNA testing, that child discovers that that wasn't their biological parent at all. So it encompasses a lot of different people learning about their past and their heritage.
So, for you, how did your DNA surprise unfold and what was the moment of realization?
Well, for me, it took many years for my unfolding, I guess, for lack of a better word. The I began to have the first. There were things that happened throughout my life that I was like, it didn't sound quite right. But the first true discrepancies began when my family took Ancestry.com test for just for fun, and that happens a lot in the DNA world. It's just, hey, let's all get together and let's do these tests. Funny part of my story was that my husband looks just like Paul McCartney. So we laughed about the fact that he would come up and come back British and not full blood Swedish, but ends up that I was the one with the big twist. And when the results came back, I showed 28% Scandinavian, and my mom and my brother had none. That was, yes, things have been said, but that was the biggest indicator for me that. And then from there, my questioning and getting down to the bottom of it was just it just took, it was really over a 12 to 13-year period.
So, what inspired you to turn this deeply personal experience into your book, If You Only Knew?
Well, it is a deeply personal and emotional experience for a lot of people. The title came from a comment that my dad would make very often, too often, in my opinion, but he would just start kind of sometimes a sentence. If he'd say, "If you only knew." If you only knew what your mother had done, or if you only knew the truth. And that was really hard for me. The first time he said it to me, I was crushed. And I share that in the book. I literally just, I went home, I called my mom. This was before cell phones, right? So I get home and I call her on the landline. And she's just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea why he's saying these things. But that was kind of the beginning of it. And it started making me question And I'm glad for that, but at the same time, it was very difficult because I didn't understand what was being said. So the decision to write the book really came when I did have the discovery. I found two half sisters and two first cousins that actually live in the same area that I do. The way that they had treated me, I mean, really, for lack of a better word, they shunned me and treated me like I was not, like I wasn't telling the truth. I was making up stories. And I had enough information before I ever made connection with any of these ladies. And they knew the truth, but they really didn't want to accept it. So at that point in time, I knew that I needed to write the book, and get it out there that this was happening. I didn't write the book out of retaliation. I wrote the book rather to have a voice for myself, but to have a voice for others that were going through the same situation, and we're being treated poorly. And it's very, very common, as sadly as it sounds. The discovery is tough enough, but then when you're being treated kind of like an interloper, or you're jumping into someone's life, it just manifests circumstances, and it intensifies the hurt, especially when that rejection happens. Don't get me wrong, though. There's many, many people out there that have amazing stories of acceptance and love that come from this situation. But I just wrote the book to heal. I wrote it to tell the truth, and so that more people would understand on all sides that it is a reality, and it's going on every day in our society across the globe. It's not just in the United States. It's everywhere.
So, you guys got to hear the first about 9 minutes of Miss Leslie Liljenberg's interview. And unfortunately, due to some technical issues that we had, there was a thunderstorm here, and it looks like the studio just gave me the announcement that they're having some studio wide site issues. So, I am going to just recoup the rest of the interview by saying that Leslie has definitely taken a lot of time to go into breaking down both from her personal experience and the little bit that she shared with us in the first half of this about her family genetics and DNA. And I was going to pause to add in that those of you who have been listening to The Mind of Cy Marie might already be aware that I am a multi ethnic person and I am white presenting. But within my own DNA, there were some surprises that were also found, some of which I did know, and most of my family stories did match up with what had been described to me. But there was one in particular that I feel like is very relevant here. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about that a little bit due to how it correlates with how genetic surprises can affect identity and family dynamics for the people that are experiencing them. So, we have this situation where we all kind of get curious at times about our genetics, right? And as she was explaining, different stories and situations can come across that are not always necessarily a bad thing, but in some cases they might be, and how parents might not always be forthcoming for many reasons. And I actually knew someone in history in my life who did something like that, who had a child and met someone and they got married, and the child was a baby, and the child's original genetic father did not want anything to do with the child or to acknowledge being their parent in any capacity. And so the man that they met, they ended up marrying, and they changed the child's name and put in all of their baby books that man's name as the father. And the child believed for the duration of their adulthood, and I believe even now, that that person was their father, when in fact those of us who knew the situation know that that's not the case. And it's their family, so I never did interject my opinion, but if people would like to know my opinion, I think that that is wrong, and any kind of lying of that sort of nature in order to protect your reputation is actually a disservice to your child. And I feel like that's something that Leslie probably resonated with from what she described from the first half of the interview. I do know that she adds a pinch of naughty but nice humor to this book, and that is something I feel will help navigate heavy and emotional territories, being that I'm a person that understands this. And coming back to what I was going to center on my discussion for myself is I found out that I had a black ancestral slave who is one of my descendants. I mean, one of my ancestors. I am a descendant of her. And this had never been discussed in my family. We did discuss that we have Native American in us, which I have had a DNA test to confirm, and I am 27% Shalagi Kitoa, which is exactly what my grandfather told my mother, because that was her father, obviously, was the one who was the Native American. But it came from his lineage. That this is something that I feel that people really seem to forget, is there were a lot of Native American tribes who did trade in slaves with white plantation owners for black people, and that includes the Cherokee freedmen. And so there are African American and Native American and mixtures of people of all those types who came out of those relationships that occurred, which of course were because of slavery, and most of the time that would imply that it was not consensual, and we all know what that means. But as much as I did recognize the native assimilation in my family and the different things that happened there, I was quite surprised when I encountered my ancestor who was a registered slave in the slave registration papers in the census, and whose obvious lineage from doing my ancestral research showed that her daughter was a mixed race child of the plantation owner and herself, and that daughter went forward to marry someone who they classified as mulatto in the census documents. And then they had a child. And as this happened, the children became more light skinned. And since they were with mulatto Creole backgrounds, Spanish and Scottish are all part of my background. And I knew that the Scottish would be there. I knew Scotch Irish would be there. I knew that there would likely be some Nordic because of my father. And in my father's lineage, it's actually very much that way. And also Portuguese. And most people who know anything about Portugal are aware that there are a lot of African descendants who are mixed race there as well. And I discovered that there are a lot of people in my family who are not predominantly European, and that a lot of them chose to assimilate and pass for white in order to get through, and they didn't talk about it and they didn't acknowledge any of that history, which I think is part of what goes into some of the legacy discussions that I have here on the Mind of Simery, which was the reason why I had invited Leslie to come. Unfortunately, due to the technical error that we had that kind of cut us out, I'm now left with just trying to break down a little bit to you all about what I am interpreting from this journey. And I imagine that the hardest part of writing this book was finding out these things, because I know it was for me. It leaves you with a lot of answers, but even more questions. And in order to correctly display our ancestry and to give them all the honor they deserve, I feel that talking about these things and going into those deep dives like she has done is critical, so that we know where we came from, who we are, and we can close up any kind of lasting traumatic wounds that might have been opened because of this. And the reality is, with not parent expected, as she was discussing, is in a lot of cases like this, the entire story of one's identity that has been delivered to them and the narrative that they are familiar with is completely shattered like a mirror, and now they're left with all these fragmented pieces trying to figure out who they are, so that they can look in the reflection and understand themselves more fully. And that goes back into that know yourself, know thyself. How can you know thyself if everything you were ever told from the time of infancy was absolutely false according to the true history of your people? It is incredibly difficult to reconcile those two notions without taking the time to do these deep dives and going through and actually picking up all the pieces of those fragments to figure out how you can create a mosaic of information regarding your ancestral tree. So I really appreciate that Miss Lezlee Liljenberg took the time to discuss a few minutes today about her journey. And I would implore you all to please go check out her book, If You Only Knew, and keep up with what's next for her as far as new projects, events, and areas of advocacy that she's going to be specializing in, because the work that she's doing here is truly crucial for all of us. And it applies to any and all of us in our own different and individual ways. So thank you again for tuning in to the Mind of Simery today. Once again, I apologize for the tech errors. It's not a usual occurrence, but as you know, I work around all of these different challenges every day, and showing you that you can do the same is what I'm here to do. So have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope that October starts out amazing for you, and please go check out Lezlee Liljenberg's book. I will have a link in the description notes below. Thank you.